Welcome to the magnificent Hampton Court Palace. This palace was intended to rival the famous French palace of Versailles. Includes the oldest surviving hedge maze in Britain. Also a location for Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, which in my opinion was the worst of the series. However, today we are here to provide you a unique insight into the Indian Army at the Palace exhibition, the Standing with Giants installation and the interpretation board opposite where Indian soldiers once resided. Our exploration delves into the hidden history of the palace, including shadowy experiments on soldiers, the story of a commander betrayed and killed, and the role of Sikh soldiers in establishing the UK's first Gurdwara. Proving that Hampton Court Palace isn't just about the Tudors, we'll delve into the fascinating connection of Sophia Duleep Singh to the palace. Joining us are community curators Rav and Tej, familiar to those who have watched the podcast, Zakira Begum, the interpretation officer from Hampton Court, and Vani Sidiyan, a history tour guide. Before we get started, I had to ask a couple of them, why should you, watching this video, visit the exhibition?
Why should people come to the exhibition? See, I grew up 2 minutes down the road from here. I was born in Hampton Hill. I went to school in Kingston, and I have come to Hampton Court Palace a dozen times on school trips and family visits, and I've learned about the Tudors and their majesty, Henry VIII and his 6 wives and all of that, and that has been my understanding of Hampton since the beginning of my time. For me to suddenly find out these stories about an Indian princess, a Sikh Indian princess who looks like me, and Indian soldiers who came from the same villages as my ancestors, once stood in the same place as I stand, that means something. I think people, especially British Sikhs, need to take a second to realise that all these places that were once coated with a colonial history of exclusively English spaces also belong to us. There are stories here of our ancestors, of our people, the journeys that we have gone through to create a presence in this country. And what this exhibition does is really commemorate some of the first people that played a presence here in a palace full of so much decadence and majesty.
You should come to this exhibition because there's a different perspective of the history of Hampton Court. This is a very different story that we don't normally give space to tell. So come to Hampton Court, learn about this hidden history, and it is our history, and it's a shared history. It's British history as well, and it should be part of the canon of histories that we tell at Hampton Court.
When you arrive at Hampton Court Palace, be prepared for how big it is, something I underestimated myself. It's like a time traveler's buffet, but don't worry, you won't need a DeLorean to visit, just a keen sense of curiosity and maybe a comfy pair of shoes. The exhibition is situated at the entrance to the Great Fountain Garden right here on the map.
We have various aspects of the exhibition. We have objects like this tunic for the 32nd Sikh pioneers, badges, turban badges, shoulder badges for various regiments of the Indian Army. We have postcards depicting the life at the palace. We've got Dobbies washing clothes, chefs cooking food for the various Indian regiments. Every regiment brought its own chef due to caste obligations. And you can see life at the palace. Some of them, they're playing games. Next door, you have some interviews of descendants of soldiers for each of the coronations. So we have someone from the 1902, 1911, 1937 coronation, their great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, telling us about what they think. And also we have somebody whose forefathers were at the 1919 peace contingent, which came here during the end of the First World War. So it's always interesting to hear firsthand from what they have to say. And what we can hear in the background is some voice interpretation of some postcards in Punjabi, Urdu and Hindi. These are letters written by soldiers back to their families. And we can hear those voices here at the palace.
The exhibition has a wealth of history on offer. With time being limited, we thought it best to cherry pick some of the most interesting, ensuring there's still plenty of mystery left for your own exploration when you visit.
So this photo is a group photo of the 23rd Sikh pioneers who were here for coronation of King Edward VII in 1902. And it's actually how I got involved with this exhibition, because I was asking questions to people at the palace about who are these men and if they have their names. Subsequently, I found out the names from the British Library, but this is how my relationship began with this sort of history. And I think this is a significant photo for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you have a Subadar in the center called Subadar Balwant Singh, who went on to become Subadar Major. He was a Subadar Major in the First World War. He was shot dead by one of his own men in the First World War. and the reasons are quite dark. There were caste dynamics within each regiment. So although each regiment primarily recruited people from one caste, it didn't always happen. And he was from a Sikh background, and the rest of the soldiers are from the Musbis and Ramdasia background. And they may have felt hard done by that the Subedar Major, the senior officer, was not from their community. So that's actually been alluded to in war diaries when the 2nd Battalion of the 23rd was raised. That we need to keep the caste composition in mind because of what happened in the 1st Battalion in Aden. He's murdered in 1915 in Aden while he was sleeping, as well as a fellow officer. So 2 of them were murdered. So that's highly significant. It's very unusual. And here he was 12 years before the First World War at Hampton Court, leading his men. So that's interesting. Second thing is, this on the bottom left is one of the followers or non-combatants. So these are men who were not armed, but were, for example, barbers, cooks. So in the non-Sikh regiments, there were barbers, nais. There were dobbies, washermen, chefs. Each regiment brought its own chef. So they were part of the unit, but they weren't armed, they weren't in uniform. And very rarely do you see them photographed. But here you have one here. Even in the bottom photograph, you have 2. So we call them followers, camp followers. So it's interesting to see them also photographed. There's also a reason why I like it. When you zoom in, their medals show that they were veterans of the Second Anglo-Afghan War in 1878. So some of them were marched from Kabul to Kandahar. They got the Kabul to Kandahar Star, 300 miles. And in 1878, they were fighting in the Second Anglo-Afghan War. And 24 years later, here they are at Hampton Court Palace, in this kind of place. Well, I wonder what they would have thought walking around here. But it's quite interesting, you know, because I'm sure you've been to Home Park already, and you can see where this photo was taken. So this is an article in the Journal of Anthropology published in 1903. And it was effectively an exercise in eugenics. So when they're here for the camp in 1902 for the coronation of King Edward VII, anthropologists decided to use both the Indian troops here at Hampton Court Palace and other colonial troops at Alexandra Palace as part of a study to measure sort of an ethnographic study, if you like, which kind of fed into the martial race theory which was prevailing at the time, that certain castes or communities are better at certain things, like have martial traditions, and other communities don't have martial traditions. And hence they measured heights, head circumferences. Head circumference was measured as a sort of an index of how intelligent someone could be. So the wider the head circumference, bizarrely meant had a bigger brain, which obviously is not how it works. But yeah, head circumference and head width was measured to determine something called the cephalic index, where you divide one by the other. And also the height was measured. And then standard deviations were determined. And each community was looked at how, so the smaller the standard deviation, the purer the community. Whereas if there's large standard deviation, then that community has mixed with others and therefore probably is not a thoroughbred community and maybe not as good at fighting or something like this. Some sort of conclusions were drawn up. But approximately, there was 1,200 soldiers here for 1902. Around 10% were recruited into this study. I don't think there was anything like informed consent or anything at the time. It was just a matter of, you got to come and take part in this study. And a similar kind of around 10% of the colonial troops from the Caribbean or Australia, Canada, Alexandra Palace, about 10% of them were also recruited into the study as well. It's obviously a highly controversial paper, highly controversial study, which would not make it past any ethics committee today. But it happened here at Hampton Court Palace. So this is one of those significant stories at Hampton Court Palace in 1902. It wasn't repeated in 1911 or 1937, but it's a dark history at Hampton Court. But there you have it. It's an aspect of this exhibition that most people probably thought they wouldn't see. And here we have, in 1911, an article from a newspaper, the Times newspaper, which coincided with the visit of the Maharaj of Patiala, Bhupinder Singh, for the coronation of King George V. And of course, Indian Army were here as well, about 600 troops. And the Times article mentions a proposed Sikh church in London. So here, the first Gurdwara, which is now we know as the Khalsa Jatha Central Isles, was established in 1911. It was a couple of years before that on paper, but it came into being in 1911. And it came into being because the Maharaj of Patiala gave a donation of £8,000 which happened to equate to a sawa lakh, 125,000 rupees. And the newspaper mentions that a deputation of Sikhs from Hampton Court, together with some students who were studying here at the time, pressed upon the Maharaja Patiala for a place of worship. And here we have literally a postcard of a deputation of very senior Sikh soldiers here. They were Subadar majors and Subadars amongst this 25-strong group. And this would have been the deputation of Sikhs that would have really had a first-hand involvement in sort of twisting the arm of the Maharaja to establish a Gurdwara here in London, which is the first Gurdwara in Europe, not just in the UK.
With the feast of history on offer at the exhibition, you may think that's it. Yet, as you explore the rooms facing the Great Fountain Garden, the Standing with Giants installation catches your eye through the windows. This begs the questions: what is the story behind its creation and how does it tie into the exhibition?
So Standing with Giants is a commemorative World War I and World War II installation art piece that you can see behind me. And they display across the UK and also in Normandy as well recently. And so they are commemorations to represent the fallen and the dead of World War I and World War II and current day conflicts actually. But when they approached Hampton Court, they said they wanted to display it here. We asked them if they would be willing to work with us to tell the story of a hidden story that we have at Hampton Court of Indian soldiers who were camped here at Hampton Court on several occasions. So the way we did this is, as you can see, alongside the traditional Tommy soldier, you can also see an Indian Army soldier as well, a representation of the Indian Army there. We commissioned 25 specially commissioned ones just to go alongside them at Hampton Court only. But since then, they have travelled, they've left Hampton Court and been part of the displays across the UK as well. So this is the third year we've brought them back, and the reason it's quite important that they're back this year is because we've built on the relationship with Standing with Giants and actually told the story in a more permanent way at Hampton Court, as well as through it. Currently, we've got an exhibition on, which is running until September 2024 now. And so we've grown and grown this project purely from the first instances when we started with just one silhouette representation of the Indian Army. So at the moment, if you come to Hampton Court, you will find across the gardens a permanent interpretation panel where we tell the story about the Indian encampment and how they basically camped here on several occasions. Just in front of me over there is where they camped, so that's why we thought it was appropriate to put the interpretation out into the gardens where you can find the story.
Recording time on the day was limited, but before we explore the interpretation panel, I seized the opportunity to ask Zakira about the challenges of organising the exhibition and how the palace upholds historical authenticity.
That's interesting. So some of the challenges we face for a exhibition is we don't have anything from the era that we're looking at that is usually original. They're usually reproductions, or they're not the original thing that belonged to someone. For instance, we have medals on display, but the medals are a representation. They are originals, but they weren't originally owned by the person that we're talking about, for instance. So the challenge was, is it important that we have something that is actually owned by someone? And we were, as a collective project team, we were like, well, no, it doesn't actually matter. We know the story, and we know the story of the person. And if we have a representation of the medals that they owned, it doesn't really matter. The important part is it's integral that we tell the story. And to tell that story, you need really interesting objects, and you need 3D objects as well, because a lot of the objects that we had were quite flat. So that one of the challenges was to try and also make postcards and newspaper articles interesting to look at. And how do you do that, basically? And that's where the challenge is for myself as the interpretation lead on it. Is we work with designers and we work with beautiful illustrators who help us make it quite a dynamic, interesting space to look at.
No, thank you. How did the team ensure accurate representation and historical authenticity in the exhibition?
Well, that comes down to our community partners and our curators, who are the font of knowledge when we go to, usually for accuracy and historical accuracy as well. That's what they're there for. We go to them with a lot of information and say, could you check this out for us? But also, not only that, in terms of authenticity as well, it was really important that we spoke to our community partners, which is Ravantesh, who have the credit of community curators, because that's what they were. They were helping us pick the objects. They were helping, authenticate a lot of the information as well through their community contacts And they themselves, they wouldn't say it themselves, they are historians themselves, not, professionally, but they are historians themselves. And so that's how we made sure that we were being honest, authentic, and also accurate with all the information.
As we progress to the video's penultimate section, we're now positioned opposite the Standing with Giants exhibit gazing towards Home Park. This brings us to the interpretation board, a feature Zakira spoke of earlier. It acts as our historical GPS, navigating us through the rich stories of the past.
And it really tells a story of the coronations. Edward VII in 1902, George V in 1911, George VI in 1937, and the peace processions. And when you look around here at Home Park, you're thinking just 100 years ago, and this was full of like an Indian community. Punjabis from the north of India, over-represented in these 26 regiments that came over from India. And look, on George V's celebration, he gave a speech on the 2nd of August 1919, and he said, "I heartily thank all my Indian soldiers for their loyal devotion to me and to my empire, and for their sufferings cheerfully borne in the various campaigns in which they have served in lands and climates so very different from their own." So the interesting thing about here is the date, 2nd of August 1919. 2nd of August 1919, World War I, we're in the peace procession. But just a few months earlier, these soldiers would have heard about Jallianwala Bagh, Spanish flu, the famine in Punjab. All of these things are going on. So the climate, the socio-economic climate, for when the king is thanking them, and they're here in his grounds, but actually Punjab, there's a very different story in Punjab. There's famine going in Punjab. These soldiers are disconnected from that story by being told to come here to take part in peace procession. And you can probably see that in their eyes here. That they're in a distant land that's colder, that they're where they're from. But obviously they've been through World War I, so they're kind of acclimatized to Europe. But that whole economic situation in Punjab, I think, comes through the letters, because all of these soldiers are asking, how is Punjab? How is the village? How is the wheat? How is the harvest? Because they must be hearing about the economic problems there. We come through to life at the camp, and we talk about the 1,500 bed in 1919 again here. And this is a letter from 29th of January 1915. And it's describing World War I. And it says, "This is not war. It is the ending of the world. This is just such a war as was related in the Mahabharata about our forefathers." So what they saw in World War I, they'd only ever read about in the Mahabharata, And so we put that one here. And then we have various activities that went on at camp. And here you see the Sikh soldiers, these are mainly Sikh, with the chakkars playing a game of quoits, just passing time in these grounds. And here we have a barber for maybe the non-Sikh regiments. So that's the interpretation board.
Having indulged in the rich and surprising history at Hampton Court Palace, a short journey across the road takes you to the former home of Sophia Duleep Singh. However, due to the traffic noise on the road outside Sophia's former residence, we chose a quieter spot near where the princess once sold the suffragette, by the palace entrance. With the palace as the backdrop, Vani Salyan provided us a captivating account of Sophia's legacy.
Sophia Duleep Singh, she was the daughter of Maharaja Duleep Singh and the granddaughter of the last Maharaja of Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. She was born and brought up here because Duleep Singh came here when he was a child under Queen Victoria's guidance, and she grew up as Queen Victoria's goddaughter along with her sisters. She lived a life of great luxury, and she had a very lavish lifestyle where she would party frequently, was introduced into the nobility, dressed in the latest fashions, all with a government pension at hand. And one day, her and his sisters make the decision to attend a party in Delhi at the Delhi Darbar. And she goes to India for the first time in her life at this time, and what she sees just changes her forever. This is the first time she's seeing fellow Indian people who look like her, people who speak like her. She's introduced to Lahore and the kind of lands that her father and grandfather once owned that was taken away from her, and suddenly her mindset changes. She is no longer part of this sort of British aristocracy and nobility in her mindset. She starts to feel the sense of contempt for the British, in sort of an outrage of what her and her family was once owed and how it was taken away from them. So she comes back to the UK and decides to try and commit this energy into something good and use it for some sort of movement that she truly believes in. And this is when she decides to join the Women's Social Political Union. And while she was based here, under Queen Victoria's own privilege, she was given an apartment right here in Faraday House. While she's based here for these 5 decades, she starts engaging in this suffragette behaviour and taking an active role in part of the WSPU. She starts selling her jewellery to bail her fellow suffragettes out of jail. She stands right outside the doors of Hampton Court Palace with a large poster board with the word suffragette plastered right on it, selling suffragette magazines, raising funds for the suffragettes and fighting for her mission. She throws herself in front of the cars of MPs, vocally screaming for the right to women's vote. Faraday House itself was once raided by bailiffs after she refused to pay taxes, claiming no taxes without taxation, without representation.
With there being so much history on offer, I was curious about what our expert guides hope visitors will take away from the exhibition. And no, I don't mean taking something physically.
That this is our history. It's whether we're Indian or British or any other community, this is our shared history. And that's important for education. It's also important for the future. It's important for things like community cohesion as well, especially in a turbulent period that we're going through. History is very important because it helps us guide where we go in the future.
A key takeaway, I hope that people are intrigued to learn more, because there is more. There is always more to tell about these histories, and to understand that this isn't a marginalised story. It's part of our history, part of British history, and, you know, we belong here, basically. That's our history. Our stories belong here.
Touche. Awesome. Thank you. Hopefully this video has whetted your appetite for the historical wonders on offer at Hampton Court Palace. A heartfelt thank you to Rav for the invitation, and to all our patrons and YouTube members for their contributions to these videos. If you're interested in supporting my work, consider becoming a patron, link in bio below, or a YouTube member, click the join button on my channel. Why not plan a delightful family day out or charm your better half with an educational date here? In order to help remove a barrier to access, we're providing heavily discounted tickets via the shop link in the description below. We've got a limited number, so please be quick if you want to get hold of yours. Until our next historical adventure or podcast, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. After a day of recording, me and cameraman are off to have a romantic meal. See you guys later.